Welcome to Season 2, Episode 10 of The Life of a Servant. In this episode, celebrated media personality Vince Nigro, host of Insights on CamoesTV+, chats with author Dennis Mills about his newest memoir, From the Wood Chair to the Green Chair. In this 30-minute conversation, you'll learn about the inspirations behind Dennis's newest book. It takes listeners on a personal tour of the words and images that make up this very special memoir. Revealing in Poignant, Vince and Dennis share insights about why Canada's national government is such an important partner in Canada's economy and society. And they offer suggestions for anyone interested running for public office. Dennis Mills, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Vince.
We've known each other for a long time and a lot of ups and downs and whatever. And just off camera, you made an interesting comment about life in terms of runway and however you want to use it. And you mentioned the expression of a little bit of gas left in your tank, and you use a bit of that gas to write this book. From the wood chair to the green chair. I read it, and I couldn't put it down because I was able to relate to some of the people and the folks that you had in here, from presidents to prime ministers to religious order, across the board, they're all there. And obviously the book gives the 50 memoir pieces that you want to talk about. Give us a little, I mean, a lot of people think of writing a book, want to write a book. Why did you want to write this book?
Well, I never had an intention of writing a book, Vince. And first of all, thanks for having me here. 2 years ago, I went to a neighbor's at my place up north in the bush. And he was loaning me some space in his old garage. And when I went in to look at that space, I noticed a wooden chair over in the corner of that garage. And I looked at it and I said, George, would you mind if I went and took a look at that chair? I just want to look at the back of it.
Right.
And on the back of it was the brand Chairman Nils. And I said, George, that wooden chair is 80 years old. That chair was part of the chair that for the company that my grandfather started with a horse and wagon 110 years ago. I said, George, that chair has been at the opening of the Seaway, the Blunt, the Avro Arrow. It's been at 1,000 different events. And he said, you can have the chair. And so it was obviously, I subsequently checked out and found out that the only time that chair had been in Torrance, Ontario, Canada, was that the Queen Elizabeth was there in 1959. There was an event. And obviously, one of those chairs didn't get picked up by the driver or whatever. So I took the chair home and I said, you know, I've had a lot of great experiences in my life that emanated from that wood chair. And the thought went through my mind of all the fantastic people that I met through that journey, because in the private sector, you know, you're going to homes where people celebrate their daughter's wedding or their son's bar mitzvah or the opening of a brand or the opening of the city hall. And because you're there as the supplier, the servant to the event, you get to meet a lot of really interesting people. It's when I think of the people that I've had the time to meet in my life because of that wood chair, it's pretty staggering. And so that eventually led to a customer called the Government of Canada. And I had been inspired by a gentleman that ran the exhibition at that time, 1977. David Garrick was his name.
Yeah.
And he said, the government of Canada wants to do something for our 100th anniversary. You should go and meet them and see if they can use your service. And so we went to Ottawa and we met people there from the Canadian Government Exhibition Commission. And it was my second time to Ottawa in my life, Vince. It was amazing. And I discovered this organization that does special events for the government of Canada all over the world. And we ended up designing a project for the 100th anniversary of the Canadian National Exhibition, CNE. And Pierre Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, came to the event. And halfway through his tour of the event, he said, who did this? And he guard and the assistant said, the Prime Minister wants to meet you. And I went over and met him and said, you did a good job here. You should come and work with me. Well, Vince, you and I have been in public service long enough to know that you get those compliments. The following year, he was defeated. He was gone, and Joe Clark's team put the same event on. So I walked Walter Baker through. But 6 months later, they were gone. They're gone. And then a gentleman by the name of Jim Coots, which called me,
One of my mentors.
and he said, I want to meet you at France, Yonge and St. Clair. And I went there, and he said, we want you to come to Ottawa. And I said, well, what would I do? Well, we're going to ask you to work on the cabinet committee responsible for government communications. I said, I don't even know what a cabinet committee is. Vince, I'm from the private sector.
Right.
I say 99% of the private sector guys, you and I know now, if you talk to them about a cabinet committee, they would, what is that? And so, because it's a different world, Ottawa. So I said, well, I have to go home and check with my father. He runs the business. And so my father that night said, go. And so then I ended up having that great experience on Parliament Hill in the Langevin block, working for Prime Minister Trudeau, Jim Fleming, others. And then when it was over, when Trudeau resigned, Pierre Trudeau resigned, I supported Chrétien, of course. Then in 87, Prime Minister Mulroney wanted to decentralize the national government through an instrument called Meech Lake. And I decided at that time, I'd had that blessed 4 years where we were building a strong national government, and I could see the importance of having a strong central national government, especially when times are tough. You need to have the levers to help zones, provinces, agencies, causes that really need the full force. So I decided to run in a community called Broadview Greenwood. Wasn't expected, but once again, I was blessed with great volunteers, and we won. And you won, ended up with the green chair.
Green chair. Great story. In terms of the book, there's a lot of special people in your life. Obviously, a lot of the people that are in this book. Jean Chrétien does the foreword in your book. I know he's a special person to you. Tell us a little bit about Jean Chrétien.
Well, in 1984, when the Liberal Party needed a total renewal, I believed that Jean Chrétien was the person that was best suited to walk the Danforth. That's a street in our community here in Toronto. You know it. But it's when you're rebuilding something, you've got to go right down to the grassroots. And I personally believe that Chrétien was a guy that could really take the time, because there was no way we were not going to have a long period in opposition, which we did have. And that's why I personally believed in Jean. He was passionate. He was cause-driven. He knew the country just in an amazing way. And as you know, in 93, he went on to have a majority government in that particular year, every seat in Ontario. And what I loved about Jean Chrétien, and he had the same quality actually as John Turner, who was the reason I got elected in 88, Jean Chrétien let members of Parliament be active. I was never a minister, Vince. I was a member of
You
Parliament.
offered, I heard, the ministership quite a few times, special sport.
one time I was offered and I respectfully declined. And I'll tell you, there was someone better suited than I. I had a great blast and honor being a member of parliament. And that is something that I really have a difficult time with today, Vince, because I find a lot of our members of parliament do not take full advantage of the resources that are underneath that green seat, right, that House of Commons seat. They don't know that underneath that green seat, there is a big machine. It's called the Government of Canada machinery. It's the Department of Health, the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Department of Transport, the Department of Heritage, Culture, and Environment. And people, a lot of members of parliament don't realize that when, as a member sitting in that nation's boardroom, you call up a deputy minister from a department, you know, maybe a minister is not responding to you as an MP. Well, call the department. You're elected by the people. And I used to get more stuff done by having a very strong relationship with the public service. And let me tell you that the public service is like a brotherhood. And if you have a good relationship with the public service, it's amazing what can be accomplished. And so that was why I believe that the honor, the privilege of serving in the House of Commons, sitting on that green chair, working with that green chair, could get things done.
And you always said, I'm just a servant. I'm here. I'm a servant. You always use that line. I'm a servant of the people. I'm a servant. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I'm a servant. You've always used that. I remember from the, say, Mike's days, you know, trying with Father Moore, you always were that perspective of being a servant, and you love doing that. And you love giving.
Well, you know, quite frankly, Vince, that I say that all the time, you know, but I've never felt, or I've never been made to feel that being a servant was some kind of a second class or some kind of an odd occupation. Right. You know, I've served some of the wealthiest families in this country. I've served some of the poorest families in this country. Leaders, whatever, but they've never made me feel that being a servant was some kind of a second-class job opportunity or whatever.
Dennis, you had mentioned Jim Coots calling you up, and he was one of my mentors. Keith Davies. I still, you know, reading your book and the stuff you talked about Keith Davies, and they were two guys that. When it came to politics, whether it was at the top level or at the grassroots, they would call it Dennis Mills in and say, you know, we appreciate what you're doing. We want to get you involved. Those kind of people, and just for me on that part, I was never a politician, but I decided to run one year, and Keith Davies walks into my office with that briefcase, that square briefcase. And I go, oh, and he came in, he gave me some advice. Some I took, some I didn't. But those kind of people that would come in and give you advice and work with you, I don't believe are there any longer. And that's why folks who want to run, and I know your big line about finding people to run, you work with people to run for office. I think we're missing the Jim Coots, Keith Davies of this era. Do you agree?
Well, obviously, you and I have a special edge and bias towards two giants in public service. Those men were all-stars, and their secret ingredient was to take a young person and make them feel that they could accomplish almost anything. I mean, Keith Davies, and I'm positive you went through this experience. Vince, you're going to get elected, and you know you could be the next prime minister. You'd walk out of the office almost believing it, right? If they had that ability to inculcate a sense of confidence in what you were doing. And personally, I don't see that as much today. I see it very little. And what I see today are members of parliament that are almost holding back. Sure, they're going out to their dinners and they're going to their photo ops, but Davy and Coots, they did stuff.
Yeah.
They made things happen, and they loved it when MPs did things. And what I see today is that the lobbyist culture in this country, we now have over 8,000 registered federal lobbyists. I know CEOs that you know that when you sit with them over a lunch and you say, who's your MP? Who's your MP? 9 out of 10 of them don't know who their idea. They don't know who their MP is, but I'll tell you one thing. They all know who their lobbyist is. And I think that, and this is another reason why I was motivated to get this book done, was because I believe we've got to get back to making sure that the House of Commons, the role of the member of Parliament, they're the last judges in the land. They're the last court in the land. Because, Vince, right now we're in a period of excessive greed. We're in a culture of greed where the gap between the haves and the have-nots has never been wider. And the greed that is in our community, in our country right now, it's insane. And the only antidote to greed is the Parliament of Canada. Because the Parliament of Canada is where you can intervene and antidote greed. The House of Commons, the Parliament of Canada, is where you get sharing back in balance. Right now, the House of Commons is subservient to the lobby culture. I find very little vigorous debate. When I was in the House of Commons, we were debating some nights 3-4 nights a week till 12, 1 in the morning. And we would go back and forth across and work on deals or amendments or whatever. There was much more collegiality. And I think because of the vacuum that exists right now in the House of Commons, like, it's really affecting the spirit and the economic condition of the whole country. And you can throw all the numbers you want at me about our inflation's better, our interest rates better, whatever. But I'm telling you right now, there is no antidote to greed in this country right now. And the only place you're going to get that antidote is having cause-driven men and women elected to the Parliament of Canada.
So Dennis, obviously a lot of folks that watch this program will maybe thinking of getting into public service, running for office. For many people, it's intimidating, especially that there are no Keith Davies and Jim Coots out there helping to explain the process. So a lot of people take a sideline. They sit on the sidelines. What advice would you give someone who's thinking of running for office?
Well, you've kind of thrown a lob ball at me there, because one of the principal reasons why I put these thoughts together was the hope that if 50 people read this book, that there might be 3 or 4 that would say, hey, I don't have to have a PhD from Harvard. I don't have to have gone to the London School of Economics. Vince, you're talking to the son of a dish scraper, a chair carrier, or an event planner, Chairman Mills, that ultimately, through hard work, got an opportunity to sit in one of these green chairs. And this book should make someone comfortable. They might be out there right now framing a home. They might be out there right now sort of doing someone's gardening.
Yeah.
They could be out there driving a long hauler to all over the states where they have time to think and listen to what's going on in terms of the issues, which at the time I got involved initially, I wasn't on top of any of the issues. So I'm hoping that people will read this and have the confidence, damn it, I'm going to go in Foreign Elections Canada, get the forms and sign up and run. And by the way, Vince, I don't care if they run as conservatives, liberals,
Just get involved.
independents, just get involved and have the joy, even have the joy of losing.
Dennis, one of the segments is with you and your wife walking through the snow there. family is very important, especially when you get into office. I know your family's always been supportive of you, and your wife has been supportive of you. How important is family to be supportive of all the things you do?
It is essential. Had I not had the support of my wife, Vicky, the children are, of course, always behind their parents, but the most important thing is to have the support of your spouse, your partner, in my case, Vicky, who would have to put up with hundreds of calls over the 16 years I served in Parliament, 20 years on the Hill, where can't make it. Got a curveball, got to go and cover for somebody in New Brunswick or the Western Arctic or wherever it is. The number of shocks and disappointments to your partner, to your spouse, to your wife, those shocks are often and they can be hurtful. And so that is an essential ingredient of the decision.
Right.
Your partner has to be with you.
Yeah, your partner, and then also certain communities that support you. You're very close to the Greek community. You ran in Danforth in Toronto. It's one of the East End ridings. You've got pictures with the Archdiocese of Toronto, Archbishop. You were very close to that community. That community was very good for you. Talk to us a little bit about that whole Greek community that was very supportive of you, Dennis. And I know a lot of them, I'm not going to bring up their names, but you know who I'm talking about. They're very supportive of a lot of the stuff you've done.
Look,
I remember canvassing with Carl Brewer with you, but I had to, give us a little take on that first.
well, let's start with the Greek community because no Greek community supporting me, no seat in the House of Commons. I mean, I always, of course, credit John Turner and his winning the free trade debate in 1988. That got me over the line. But my engine room, my motor in Toronto Danforth was the Greek community. And I will tell you, and I say this openly, when you have someone on your team from the Greek community that is passionate about their politics, get out of the way. I don't care whether it's writing. I don't care whether it's the sign crew. I don't care whether it's working the phones, working the streets. So for me, I was blessed to have I was in the heart of the Greek community, and I was blessed that they supported me strongly. I'll never forget the first time I went to a Greek Sunday service, and the bishop at that time stood behind the lectern, and place was packed, of course, and I was sitting in the front row. I'll never forget it, with Dr. Karantonis. And he said, Mr. Mills, the Liberal candidate, is here today, and I wish everybody get out there and support him. I was first of all shocked that a bishop would say something political from the altar, but then he was very direct in his support. So it was critical. I mean, look, I had the support of the Italian community. I had the support of the Muslim community in our riding, but it all started with the Greeks.
Also, just a quick chat. We could talk all day on all the stuff that's in this book. St. Mike's, you're a St. Mike's boy. They've had their ups and downs. You were very close to Father Moe. I was on that board, the Buzzard board, at one time for a while because of you. Give us a perspective how St. Mike's was part of your life. And I know it's part of your life. And when they had their issues, you were right there helping them. Talk to us a little bit about the St. Mike's piece of your life.
Well, I mean, I was blessed that I had the opportunity to go to St. Mike's. And I was so impressed with the Basilian Fathers. And at that time, 90% of the educators at the St. Mike's were priests and laymen. And they left an indelible mark on me, the Basilian Fathers. I wanted to be a Basilian. I wasn't good enough to be a Basilian, but I wanted to be a Basilian. And what I mean, the motto of the Basilian Fathers, the motto of St. Michael's is teach me goodness, discipline, and knowledge. And I think discipline has always been a challenge for me. And so I think that the Basilian environment, the educational environment of that institution has helped shape me, whether times were good or tough or whatever. It was always their value system permeated the way I sort of have been operating most of my life. And that's why you mentioned properly in 1995, I think it was, they ran into a little bit of a problem with their real estate there at St. Clair and Bathurst. And Father Moen, principal president, called and said, will you help? And I said, of course. And we eventually got it all sorted out. But I think that your educational experience is pretty important in terms of forming your pathway.
The other person that I had the pleasure of canvassing with you and him was Carl Brewer. I remember, the hockey legends, and I was so shocked to see a guy waiting at the campaign officer on Danforth, where we go out and I go, I'm going to canvass with Carl Brewer. It was one of those surreal situations, but you had them all. You had everybody come to support you. The Carl Brewer, a lot of folks may not know, he was a great Toronto Maple Leaf hockey player. I believe lived in the Hall of Famer, lived in the East End. Tell us a little bit about Carl Brewer.
Oh my goodness, Carl Brewer. I was sitting in my office one day with a lady from one of the seniors' homes, and her pension check got lost. So that was my particular focus that day in the office. And all of a sudden, Carl Brewer and Bobby Bond and another lady walked into my office. Oh, Vince, when you're growing up, Carl Brewer and Bobby Bond, Stanley Cup champions. And so I finished with this lady and I said, what brings you guys into my office? And Carl turned to the lady, her name was Susan, and said, what do you think? Can we trust this guy? And she said, I think so. And so they came up, they got another chair, sat down, and they said, do you know Alan Eagleson? And I said, yeah, I know Alan Eagleson. Well, how well do you know him? Well, I would know him to say hello. I've never had a bad word with him. And they said, well, he hasn't been very nice to us. And I said, here's our file. They gave me a big file. They said, please read it and get back to us and let us know if you think you can help. And they had a disagreement on their hockey experience with him on those world championship things. And they couldn't seem to get any response from anybody in the House of Commons on their file. And so I read it, and I met with them the following week. And I went to our House leader. I was in opposition at that time. And I said, look, these guys aren't getting a fair hearing. And I'll never forget it. David Dingwall, who was our then House leader, said, I used to go to bed at night saying the rosary, but Dave Keon would score goals, Dave Keon. And he said, you're first up today. So I got up in the House of Commons and I asked the question on behalf of all those NHL hockey players and why it was that the U.S. Department of Justice would pay attention to them, but we couldn't get the RCMP and others. And I thought I was just doing my job, but they were just thrilled. And that ended up, Carl Brewer was so appreciative and he became so supportive that every weekend when I would come home, he'd say, let's go out walking together. And he'd knock. And of course, he was a hero in the street for us. So that's, so Carl, God bless his soul, was just a beautiful human being.
Yeah, great story. We don't have much more time, but I just want to get your thoughts on the U.S. Election, Trump coming to power, that whole situation outside. What's your feeling? I mean, today they announced 25% tariffs in Canada and Mexico, probably a little more of a negotiating ploy. What's your take on Trump getting elected down in the U.S.?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked this question. In 1988, free trade debate, Brian Mulroney, John Turner. John Turner said, I'm opposed to this deal because I do not believe in unlimited, unfettered foreign investment. And philosophically, I'm the same way. Unlimited, unfettered foreign investment is not great for Canadians. And we can see today that it isn't. But John Turner also got into the issue of water. And my very first speech in the House of Commons was on water. Water's part of this free trade agreement. Clayton Yoder, who did his PhD thesis on water, was the chief free trade negotiator. Fast forward, we now have Donald Trump. Donald Trump is only interested in Canada for one issue. Oh, he can talk about our NATO commitments. Oh, he can talk about these tariffs. But he's only interested, Vince, in one issue, our water, our fresh water, because the USA has a huge problem when it comes to water. And I'm telling you, Canadians better wake up, because I'll tell you, if we don't have a proper relationship on water in our country, Trump will use a rocket. He'll just call up 50 CEOs, never mind the tariffs, shut down those Canadian factories, bring those jobs back to the States. And I think yesterday was not even a small grenade on these tariffs. I think he's just starting to set the table for the big issue, which is water.
Good point. So, Dennis, from the wood chair to the green chair, if someone wants to pick up this great book, where can they get it?
Ben McNally, small entrepreneur, like myself, on Queen Street here in Toronto, but he does have go Ben McNally online, and he'll ship it to you, and on we go.
Yes, it's great.
But Vince, remember what our objective is with this book. You and I have to find 8 or 10 people that want to roll up their sleeves and run in the next election.
And that's what it's all about, get young, fresh blood into the system that can continue to bring on some of the better tradition as opposed to falling into the wayside.
You got it.
Yeah. Dennis, it was great having you on the program. The thanks was fantastic.
You're kind of,
we and I've known each other for a long time, and it really has put my my political, personal, for me, it's put it into perspective. It's a book that's worth picking up. I know your Rolodex is unbelievable, but these 50 stories are mind blowers, and I think they're game changers for a lot of people. So thanks for sharing.
It's your turn now, Vince.
Thanks for right one. Okay. Dennis, thanks for being on the program.
Oh, okay, Vince.
You have been listening to The Life of a Servant, a Dennis Mills podcast. Visit dennismills.com for more information and archived episodes of this program.